Hello, I'm your host, David Newson, and welcome to Coded in Gold. This podcast explores the fractured, beautiful pieces of our modern life through compelling stories and conversations with exceptional individuals. Let's get started. Welcome. Today you'll hear my conversation with Keith Wetmore. Keith is an attorney, currently the managing director at Major Lindsey Africa, and former chair and CEO of Morrison and Foerster. Keith has led a truly fascinating life, from helping his family run their funeral home as a child to becoming the first openly gay chair of a major U.S. law firm. We talk about all of this in today's episode, and I also pick his brain on the future of the legal profession and AI. So let's jump right in. Here's Keith Wetmore. Welcome to Coded in Gold. Keith, I would love to just kick us off by what are the last 3 places you visited?
The last exotic places, probably. We had a big trip to India, and then separately a London, Paris, Morocco trip,
Wow.
and then a separate London, Paris. We like London and Paris, London, Paris, and Lake Como.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
Okay, non-exotic trips.
well, we are fortunate enough to have places to live in Newport Beach, San Francisco, and New York, and so
Oh, that's great.
we divide our time. And we spent most of the summer in Newport Beach, although
Okay.
the summer never really came in Newport Beach this year.
Oh, no.
It was spring-like.
Ah,
We turned the air conditioning on once. Um,
wow.
but anyway, so we're in San Francisco. I'm in San Francisco as I'm speaking to you today, and we're off to New York
Oh, that's great.
Monday.
And who define we? Who's we?
We is my spouse, Andrew.
Oh, okay, great. Very cool. Tell me a little bit about growing up, where you grew up,
Sure.
kind of family
Yep.
setup.
I grew up above a funeral home in Valparaiso, Indiana, very
Are you
northwest Florida.
serious?
Yes, yes.
It's so funny. So my dad is a nuclear engineer,
Okay.
but my mother would tell us this story, which I had a hard time actually believing. She was like, "But your dad wanted to be a funeral director," and I'm like, "Who, who, d- who thinks this way?"
Right,
Anyway,
right.
okay, so you actually grew up above a funeral home.
Yes, indeed. My parents from the funeral business,
Wow.
and they found a great deal of satisfaction. They really loved working with people in time of need.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and I joke that. I joke that one day it's a speech I never quite got around to giving, but for one of the state of the firm addresses, I was kicking around the idea of the subtitle being everything I ever needed to know about running a law firm I learned in the funeral business.
Oh my
But
goodness.
there, there's an anecdote I'd like to tell that was kind of why my late brother, did not succeed, did not follow my parents in that line of work. So there'd be a funeral, and my father would say to my brother, David, take a dozen chairs to the Schwartz home, the family.
Uh-huh.
And David would say, but they haven't asked for a dozen chairs. And my father would say, yeah, but they have a bunch of people coming over. They would appreciate a dozen chairs. And David would say, yeah, I don't know. They haven't asked for it. And so, that's kind of what a service business is about. It's not
Yes.
just doing what people ask. It's about anticipating what people
Anticipating,
need.
right?
And my parents were very good at that.
I mean, I want to ask this question. How did that impact you being around? Well, you're kind of in a space where people are not maybe their darkest hour, but they're in
All right.
a period of loss or
Yes.
grief.
Yes.
How did that impact your family, like on the day to day?
I'd also note we also ran an ambulance. This is before the days of EMTs, so we also
Okay.
ran an ambulance service. So
Oh,
and back then there used to be a lot of car crashes. So regularly at 2 a.m. I'd get out of bed and go with my father to the scene of a car crash when I was, I don't know, 14, 15. Um, so partly I'm very, like when physicians say, you might want to look away, I go, oh, brother,
No, we're good.
you have no idea what I've seen.
Wow.
Um, and, I did have the opportunity of late, someone suffered sudden cardiac, uh, it's called sudden cardiac death, even if you survive it. Anyway,
Okay.
and I was able to CPR them until the ambulance arrived. So I'm good in a bloody or not bloody crisis.
Which, yeah, I'm going to come back to your law firm reference.
Yeah.
Probably prepared you quite well. I mean, maybe not physically bloody, but certainly like those environments are high stress, high stakes, powerful
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. It does. It also gives, I think, one a perspective on death
Hmm.
and process around ritual around death. Um,
Ooh,
I'm kind of
talk to me about, yeah, yeah.
oh, I'm kind of a personally, I'm kind of a big believer in some aspects of the traditional grieving formalities. Um, like I kind of don't like waiting 5 months to have a memorial service. I think, though I'm not a huge fan of open caskets, I know of situations where people have been estranged, and actually seeing the face of someone was quite cathartic.
Would you
And I
consider
and one
yourself?
thing and one thing I really don't like is open mic night at a memorial service.
Yeah, that's asking for it. It sounds like
It,
it's asking for it.
it is, yes.
Okay.
I was trapped in one. The only consolation, the memorial service in question was a lawyer with the city of San Francisco legal department, and she was a lovely gal. But the folks who threw her memorial service decided to let anyone speak seemingly for whatever duration they wanted to speak,
Oh my goodness.
and it was in a synagogue that's kind of synagogue in the round, and so the only way you could leave was
Oh.
like walking behind the podium and walking out the
Oh
door.
no.
So we were trapped like rats. And the only consolation is that Willie Brown was trapped with me. So,
Oh my goodness, that's good. That's good. Would you consider yourself a spiritual person?
yes, yeah. And
Um,
I'm somewhat religious. Yeah.
okay. Define somewhat religious.
I'm an active, I guess I'm an active Protestant attender. Yes.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit more about it? And the reason I'm asking is, I've talked on this show probably at length, hopefully not ad nauseum, but I grew up in, a devout Mormon household. And when
Oh,
I was like, I first attended Brigham Young University, and then I went on my mission when I was 19 years old, and
oh, okay.
and then eventually I came out, and of course the world came crashing down in the land
Yeah,
of Mormonism for me.
yeah. Mm,
um, and I've kind of identified as spiritual but not religious,
mhm.
although I do admit that like a lot of my personal core values came from that experience and I'm grateful for it. So like I feel good about it in that respect, which is why I'm asking. So like what does religion mean to you? Like how does it impact your life?
Um,
How is it
sure.
integrated?
I pray in times of duress.
Hmm.
Um, I probably fell out of practicing religion in college and for probably a couple of decades there. And then I came to believe that I refuse to believe that my success in life is entirely attributable to my own contributions.
Ah,
Um, I've simply had too many exhibitions of grace to conclude that it's all because I'm so fucking much.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
So
Actually,
I,
yeah, and
and then
takes
there's
a
the
very
passing of
mature
the,
person to say that.
and then there's even the very interesting Ross, is it pronounced Duhat? Duhat, anyway,
Okay.
columnist for the New York Times. There's his very interesting argument, which is, um, it's not an anti-evolutionary argument. It's a question, though, why the hell did we evolve to know that E equals MC squared.
Right.
What
Right.
what possible evolutionary benefit
Right.
is higher math,
Indeed.
or the Sistine Chapel?
Mm. Yeah. Okay, bouncing back to your childhood experience.
Hmm.
Did any of those experiences lead you to becoming a lawyer?
Not, no, not really. It was quite outside of our ken, I suppose.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I mean, we had a family lawyer, and
Okay.
he dressed nicely, but then so did we in the funeral business.
Well, sure.
Yeah,
Quite nicely, I'm sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and I confess, I'm one of those sad people who sort of ended up in law because I couldn't imagine what else I was going to do with my economics degree. You know, I didn't have much in the way of career. Partly, one of my themes here is I think it all used to be easier. I think it may be that in the 1970s, we sure as hell didn't have the focus on what school you went to. And I think there wasn't the focus on, on early career selection to the same extent. It was more respectable to be indecisive and a little uninformed, um, and
Actually,
I
that's quite
I
true.
was.
Yeah, yeah. My brother had his oldest just leave home to attend his undergrad,
Mhm,
and they wanted my nephew to declare his major or two
mhm,
upon entry. And
mhm.
even when I went to school, I was like, I don't know. I have no idea.
Right. So it's and my parents were uh, lovely about being willing to pay for another couple of years of tuition. It felt like a just a natural course, and then uh, as it happened, I did quite well. I took to it, and I was more distinguished in law school than I was undergrad, and that led to lots of opportunities.
What did you enjoy about the law?
I think I'm a pretty analytical person to begin with,
You
and
sound
so
like one. Every
yeah,
time I hear
so
you speak, you always sound like one. So yeah.
well, thank you. I think,
Yes,
um,
yes, you're welcome.
um, and so I like the rigor of it. Um, I also it actually became law school became quite easy. I mean, once you I remember it's sort of like calculus, where halfway through a calculus program, the world opens up and you realize how it all works,
Sure.
and it's not a series of individual things, but it all fits together. Law school for me was kind of that same. Somewhere in the first semester, I realized, oh, torts and property, and it's all it's all the same process. They just divide it into different classes to have some taxonomy to it.
Sure.
They're just teaching the same technique.
When I was 14 years old, I had always had a paper route, like starting from like 10 or 11. And then I thought I wanted to be, well, I wanted originally to be a pilot. So when I was a little kid, it was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to fly planes. I want to fly planes. I want to fly
Yep.
planes. And then, of course, I got glasses and I was like, okay, that's out, right? Like,
Oh, right.
LASIK didn't exist at the time. So they were
Yes.
just like,
Yes.
yeah, okay, like you're
Yeah.
out.
Go do
That's
that.
not a possibility. And then I was like, oh, yeah, I want to be a lawyer. And being a lawyer was influenced, I think, probably by my parents' divorce, like around the age of 9. But by the time I was 14, I had joined like they had like a youth court program. And the youth court program kind of, trained, young kids to adjudicate, you know, folks who would otherwise other children who would otherwise be deemed like juvenile delinquents, and they
Hmm.
could kind of come through this program, and then like um uh it was a three-panel judge, and judge bench, and then you would adjudicate them and like basically sentence them to whatever community service work hours or whatever it was.
Okay.
And then they basically serve their time of community service, and then like, okay, it's expunged and there's no record and blah blah blah. And that was my first kind of exposure to lawyers because there was a local attorney that ran the
And
program.
I'm sorry, you were a volunteer? You were a
Well, yeah, I
delinquent?
was a kid. I was 14 years old. Yeah, and they trained me. I had to actually pass their little bar exam.
Okay.
So I had to learn about, juvenile delinquency, like what the
Oh, oh,
law actually says about like what happens when someone steals something and they get caught, like and how
right.
that,
Well,
so petty larceny and like, up
hmm,
to other things. And clearly we were not adjudicating, activity that like crossed a certain bar, right? So
yes.
it's
Okay.
like those were still left to the courts. But these were like little things, but it got us involved. And so I was and of course everyone's assigned like there's the prosecution, there's the defense, and then there's a panel of judges. And I started out on the prosecution side, then rotated to the defense side, and then like eventually joined the panel of judges.
Oh, okay.
At that same time, I was like, oh man, I want to know what it's like to be a real lawyer or work in a real law firm. So on my Commodore 64, I, typed a letter to a couple of local law firms, and they literally had like two partners and like a couple of secretaries, or,
Hmm.
I think the big one that ultimately actually hired me had like six or seven attorneys. And it was like, right across from the county courthouse. It was like, it was a very cool place.
Hmm.
And both of them responded to me. One said, sorry, we don't take interns that are 14 years old. Sorry. And the other one actually responded and said, hey, sure. And they actually put me in their basement, which is insane, but like very dusty basement of this very old home that was now a law firm
Uh-huh.
and or had been a law firm for at least 100 years. And I was shredding their old files from like the 20s,
Hmm.
1920s.
Hmm.
And but what was fascinating is as I was, shredding them, I was looking at them because some of them were like, car accident cases, like, and then they had photographs, and I was like, what? Or like handwritten documents, and I was just very curious about how it all worked. Then one of the lawyers kind of said like, oh, hey, if you want to, learn how this works, let me teach you how to shepherdize a case.
Hmm.
And so then, I came out of the basement because I shredded everything. It's gone. And then they were like, oh, okay, come on upstairs because they had a library. And they said, this is how you shepherdize a case. And they took me through, like, okay. And then they would talk to me about a certain case and what they needed, shepherdized. And then I would do that work. And then, anyway, it turned out I worked there mostly through high school.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And it actually came in quite handy, especially when I
Oh,
got a car, like especially when I got a speeding ticket when I was 16 or
yeah.
17 years old, and like they were very, very helpful.
Yes. Yes.
But anyway, that was my first, oh, I want to be a lawyer.
Uh-huh.
Then I started school, and then of course it was disrupted by me, leaving my Mormon mission early. I got kicked out of BYU as a result of that.
Uh, uh,
And then had to start working. So when I finally came back to school, I was a marketer by that stage.
uh-huh.
One interesting point here that I mentioned before we started recording is how you've actually impacted my life. So I actually was working at Morrison and Foerster in the New York office. I think it was 2002 or early 2000s,
Hmm.
as Morrison and Foerster was making like growing like wild. A really big push to build out a New York office.
Hmm.
And I was not at that time out at work.
Hmm.
And of course, this is in a time period where, yeah, you were pretty safe because you lived in Manhattan,
Right.
but it wasn't nothing was ironclad at that time. You
Hmm.
certainly, didn't walk through the office, or I didn't feel like I could walk through the office and talk about my partner, spouse, husband, like
Hmm.
whatever.
Yep.
But it was during that time at Morrison and Foerster, I actually had the courage. I worked for a partner of the firm, and I actually had the courage to like tell him, like, hey, this is my life.
Hmm.
And and it felt safe to do so at that time,
Hmm.
um, even though it was still a very well, to me, it felt like very early on, and yet you were already out, right? And in a leadership role. And so I just want to say, like, thank you. Um,
Oh,
Sometimes you just by being out, you don't know the effects that you actually have on young people.
sure. Sure. Yeah, well, when I joined the firm as an associate in '82, first, I always like to point out if it's a career path, if it's a career path is the topic, I like to point out, particularly to young lawyers, that I've had everything happen to me that supposedly will end your career. I had a summer at Wilmer where I didn't get a summer offer.
Wow.
My first job was at a very good small firm in San Francisco that kind of blew up, and I got laid off uh, 6 months after I started. So I was on the street, and it was in the middle of there have been recessions before. I'll remind I'll remind a young audience. And there was one in 1980, 81, 82. That was, remember, the stagflation, or
Oh
that's
yeah.
when they finally put the stake through the heart of the inflationary 70s. Anyway, so I landed at Mofo. But before I did, I wanted to come out to them because I said, look, in a perfect world, I wouldn't need to talk about this, but it's not a perfect world. And
Mm.
so I just want you to know. And, you know, it was not it was not a rainbow parade of a response. It was more like, and I said, and so, you know, the person I spoke to said, well, it's fine by me. In fact, he's a good Mormon guy.
Mm.
Um, he said, "Well, it's fine by me. What more do you want me to do with this,
Ah,
information?"
sure.
And I'm sure it was probably a more awkward conversation for him than it was for me. But I said, "Well, I think I'd like you to just bounce it off to make sure that other people I'd be working with significantly would be fine." And so he came back and said, "Yeah, yeah, we're good." Some people said they would rather have not known, but which is a very 1980s sort of
Wow.
thing. But
Sure.
but I, in turn, had the luxury of having Joe Terciano, who was essentially his title was managing partner for operations, but he was firm wide kind of second in command.
Okay.
And Joe was an incredible human being, uh, gay, but only out. I have to describe to people that there was a day when there were different kinds of out. There are people who had lived a gay social life, but no one at work would know, and that was pretty common
Mhm.
actually, particularly in San Francisco, and New York. And so Joe was very out socially, but never talked about it at work. And his law partners, probably half of them surmised or knew, but it was never talked about. But Joe was not at all. Joe was very supportive of me, and then sadly died of HIV, which, of course, like the Rock Hudson phenomenon,
Oh yeah.
it outed him to his colleagues. And he became much more casual about that information as he became ill. So I had the benefit of they were not out role models, but they were very confident people.
Well, how does being a lawyer change the way that you see the world?
It probably informs how I approach challenges or
Okay.
disappointments. Um,
Oh, you said disappointments?
yes, when
Okay.
something doesn't go my way, I tend to, probably to an annoying degree, I'm analyzing the other person's outcome or the other person's position.
Ah, okay. Yep.
I'm very, annoyingly kind of, on one hand, on the other hand.
Sure, sure. Like,
Even
oh,
when one hand,
I can understand this other point of view. It's
yes,
like,
yes,
well, yeah, yeah,
even
yeah.
when one hand is my own hand.
Right.
Um,
Totally, totally.
and I know for some people, some lawyers, that makes them just more cantankerous about insisting that their hand. But I think um, I tend to be more like, oh, I get it. I know how. I guess intellectually empathetic is something that's quite developed in me.
Sure. What age were you when you came out?
It was kind of my after my first year of law school, really in my first year of law school. So, but I was kind of young, 22.
Wow. Family reaction to that?
That was a couple of years later,
Okay.
and my father had died. My mother had a very difficult year. It was right on the heels of my father's death, so she had a lot going on.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was a very bad first year, and then over time it became very, very good.
Oh, excellent.
There are things, we have a lot of jokes in my family, like when you know, that trick or treat for UNICEF 2 years in a, well, first, you ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? I
Right.
actually used to say I want to be an interior designer. Okay.
Wow.
Um, and there was, and my parents had a very flamboyant, although again, in Indiana in the 60s, the G word was never uttered, or the H word, but
Right.
but
Right.
he was gay, 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 interior designer, and so there I am, in Valparaiso, Indiana, at third grade. People ask what I want to be, an interior designer, and then like 2 years in a row for trick or treat for UNICEF, I basically did a swimsuit competition drag as Miss UNICEF. And the story goes, like the second year, one of the other mothers pulled my mother aside and said, "I don't think you ought to be encouraging this." Anyway, so the joke in the family is, and my mother was shocked when I came out to her.
Well, so we have so my siblings, I have four siblings,
Uh-huh.
um, and um, and when we all get together, that has come up
Hmm.
pretty often. Like,
Yeah,
how did she not know?
right.
Right? Like, hello, like, and there was just like, okay, every instance, there's so many instances that, like, in total, and like, still, my mother will still sit there and be like, but I didn't know, I
Right.
right?
Well, I have a theory that I use to excuse a lot of parental struggles over kids coming out.
Mm,
Particularly historically. I mean, when you think that what you're saying is, "Hey, mom, dad, my primary sexual drive is a crime if I execute on it. There is no relationship I will ever have that will be sanctioned by the state.
mm.
I can be fired at any moment simply for acknowledging who I am and who I love." What parent would say, "Oh, dandy.
No,
Sounds good to me.
yeah, you'd be
Worth a
terrified.
shot."
Yeah, you'd be terrified for your
Of
child.
course,
Yeah.
of course. And so, as those various things got stripped away, it's a very different. And I have mixed feelings about the 12-year-old in my church, who's out as a gay boy, and I'm thinking, oh my God, you'll never know the awkwardness of taking taking a girl to the prom, and
Right, right,
anyway,
right, right.
there's just some cultural learning that I worry that they'll miss by not struggling a little bit with it.
Interesting.
And that is sort of why I went very gung ho into fraternity life, and it was very important for me. I knew intellectually that I had, because I'd never been in team sports.
Okay.
I was the drama club kid. Uh,
Okay. Yep.
so I knew intellectually that I had a not fully developed sense of how to relate to guys, and I didn't know quite. I hadn't quite put all the pieces together, but I tended to end up running things. So I was, president of the fraternity, and
Yeah.
I learned a lot of things about what 20-something boys will do left to their own devices.
Sure. So speaking of like tending to lead things, you eventually become the chairman of MoFo.
Yep.
What was that like as a gay man?
uh, there's so much that I think I got done that I'm. There's so many things I think I got done by virtue of my, you know, talent and motivation and devotion of my partners.
Right.
Uh, and you know, as and my sexuality really had nothing to do with it, other than I am tremendously honored when I talk to people such as yourself inside of MoFo and out of MoFo who say, you know, I didn't know you, but you informed my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but again, that wasn't anything I did. That was just me showing up as me. I'm frankly a lot more pleased that I, doubled the top line and tripled the bottom line.
That's right. That's
Uh,
right. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I was asking, I think, and I'm not saying this lightly, and I'm thinking, and like my filter is like, wow, that's a powerful word. But like, there are pioneers, folks who really do uh, blaze a new path. Um, and being out as young as you were at the time
hmm
and having such a trajectory, like the trajectory of your career has been just phenomenal. Like, I mean, it's not even
right.
textbook. It's like complete outlier, right? We're not talking about like being within, certain standard deviations. It's off the charts.
Oh, well, that's kind of you.
And I would imagine, being at the top of your game, like not everyone can love, like not everyone can love you, right?
hmm
Like especially, and I would imagine in a law firm setting,
Sure.
right? um, did your sexuality ever affect relationships? I guess is like the question, or was it at a time where your professionals, and this would speak to the professionals at Mofo that like, oh
hmm
yeah, this is a non-issue for us.
When I was first elected, a dear partner, Billy Schwartz, extraordinarily talented guy, um, Billy had run the selection committee that chose me,
Okay.
put me forward.
Hmm.
And we were meeting with our chief marketing officer to talk about how to cover, just the rollout of the announcement of my becoming chair.
Sure.
And the chief marketing officer said, "So, what are we going to do?" I don't remember quite how he said it, but what are we going to do with the gay thing? Because
Oh,
it's newsworthy. On
sure.
the other hand, do you want it? What are we going to do with it?
Yep.
And at which point Billy said, we spent exactly the same amount of time in the selection committee talking about Keith's sexuality as we did his hair color. Um,
Great.
and that's kind of the way I think the firm always handled it. Now, I think, Mofo had a history of enjoying being of being a little bit of a have-not firm as opposed to Pillsbury, for example.
Yes. Oh, of course. Yep.
Pillsbury, which represented
Oh yeah.
Standard Oil and
That's right.
and PG&E and the old line companies,
Hmm.
and we were a little scrappier, which is how we ended up, particularly compared to Pillsbury, much more technology oriented firm,
Yep.
for example. So I think there were a lot of people in the firm who got some mileage. That the firm brand, if you will, was embellished in certain directions by my being gay. The firm brand was a little edgier.
It was, oh, for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, like Morrison and Foerster being truncated to Mofo
right, right.
is, that's for the legal world completely unexpected
Yes, yes.
and a little subversive,
Uh-huh. Yeah,
you
sure.
know, which I mean, I dig very much so.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I love it. For folks not in the law, paint a picture of what other law firms at the time were like. I mean, you mentioned Pillsbury. It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, Standard Oil, kind of like all of these like poster children companies of, tremendous success and prestige at the
Well,
time.
this was just the era where lawyers would, um, well, it depends what time you're talking about, but 2000, let's say 99, 2000, about the
Mhm.
time I took the reins. Um, that's kind of when lawyers stopped wearing ties stopped wearing ties every day,
Yep.
particularly in Northern California, because then it
Right.
became we want to look like our clients.
Sure. And
The
in
fights we
tech,
have,
yeah,
the
that's not
fights we
happening.
had about right, the fights we had about whether the online. I mean, you're in marketing. The fights we had about whether the online photographs you'd wear a tie or not. Now, one of my you were on during Amanda Duckworth's era when she was chief
Yeah,
marketing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. She was
So I
there.
remember Amanda always wisely pointed out Larry Sonsini is always photographed wearing a tie.
Oh, yeah,
Sonsini
yeah.
was, listener, probably the most famous early stage company lawyer in America.
Yep.
Uh, he always wore a tie. But anyway, it didn't seem to him. He didn't seem to get viewed as being irrelevant because he wore a tie. I will say the one coming back actually to Billy Schwartz. He joined a presentation I did for some summer associates recently.
Okay.
The firm was kind enough to name their first year summer program after me,
Oh, that's great.
which is designed today uh, for first year lawyers who come from atypical backgrounds. Uh, first generation college, first generation or rural background, or veterans.
Wow.
So I was presenting to them, and the theme I'm about to bring up, Billy noted, actually is what I'm probably best thought of for. Um, because MoFo had always been thought of as being a place that does an extraordinary amount of pro bono work,
Mm-hmm.
thought of as a very good place to work, thought of as a great place for underrepresented minorities, thought of as a great place for gay and lesbian lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, there was just a view that we're also not making quite as much money. I really viewed my message as being that that's not a tolerable. Those two are not they're not trade-offs. One of them actually is a springboard. Having a strong culture is a springboard for better economic performance. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
trade-off. And so, to the extent I hope my legacy there is money matters. Boy, does it matter. But that you don't have to trade off culture to make more money. You just have to turn the dials that make more money.
That's right. That's right. Yeah,
You have to be rigorous about financial metrics,
that's
and
right.
that's not at odds with being a great place to work. In fact, the two go hand in hand.
Awesome. What are some mistakes you've made along the way? Bumps in the road. Um,
Oh, so many. Uh, it's not a question. I don't think leading a professional services organization is not a question of not making mistakes. It's a question of fixing them, right?
sure, sure.
Or being willing to abandon, you know, announcing a direction and realizing that's wrong. I got to do something different. I get very nervous of messianic law firm leaders.
Mm, mm.
I won't. I won't. Well, I can name names. I mean, for people old enough to remember Tower Snow at Brobeck,
Oh my
uh,
goodness. Which later got
imploded.
gobbled up by Clifford Chance.
Yes, but
Have,
essentially after it imploded. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yes, yes.
Um, and it was going to be the first law firm to go public,
Mm-hmm.
even though the ethics laws don't permit that. Uh, it was, he was issuing these enormous multi-year guarantees to recruit talent, and everybody looked at it and go, "I wonder how this works." And
Right.
ultimately, it didn't. And I remember having to defend. He did like a $500 per staff person Valentine's Day bonus, and I, in a town meeting, had to answer, well, why don't you do something like that? That would be nice. Well, anyway, a year and a half later, the place
Okay.
blew up. All those people were unemployed. Spend your Valentine's Day bonus well. Anyway, um, not that I'm still a little bitter.
Not at
Um,
all.
I made a lot of hiring mistakes. But frankly, if you do a lot of hiring, you're going to make a
You're
lot
going
of
to make a
mistakes.
lot of hiring mistakes if you're
Yeah,
hiring a lot of people. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I don't think I regret anyone I fired, and I fired a lot of people. I mean, I regret having to. I regret that people ended up without a job
Oh,
sometimes.
sure, sure.
Although, frankly, that doesn't happen very often. I mean, most people end up with another job,
Right,
uh,
right,
and
right.
maybe one that suits them better.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I don't think I regret the outcome. I don't regret the strategic choice. What I do regret is an instance or two where I should have moved much faster.
I struggle with that generally.
Hmm.
Speed to making a decision that sometimes is um, in your gut, but well supported by your head,
Hmm.
right? Where your head is like, oh, yeah, I'm supportive of that, but you have a million other things happening almost in parallel. And you're like, oh, but your gut keeps telling you, yeah, you should probably deal with that because it's just going to get worse.
Right.
I just had one of those recently about a relationship that my firm has had, and it took me, oh gosh, probably a year.
Mm.
And like but I knew pretty
Yeah.
early on, but like my mind was saying, just a little bit, like you need a little bit more time, a little bit of more data points is better than fewer.
Hmm.
Looking back, probably should have done it earlier, but at the same time, I also learned a lesson that feels good in hindsight.
Hmm.
What are your values? I want to get in like just a little bit into like kind of what makes you tick. So as a human being, what do you
Hmm.
value? Right?
Hmm.
Not necessarily in leadership, but I think personally held values actually do express themselves into leadership. I don't know that you can have one without the other, honestly.
Hmm. I suppose honesty. I think I don't think I'm flattering myself. I think I'm kind of incapable of. I don't tell white lies.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think I've heard you say this before about
yeah.
there's this almost brutal honesty and rigor even with yourself and how you like who you are and who you are out in the world has to be aligned.
Yes. Yeah. And I can't. And once I realize there are shreds of dishonesty in someone's affect or presentation, I'm really kind of done because
Yeah.
I don't have the tools. Just as I don't think I don't have the tools to lie about myself. I don't have the tools to
Sure.
deal with somebody who I can't trust.
Is
So that
that innate or did you develop that over time?
I think that's innate. And then I never lose. I've almost never lost my temper. I'm always a little bit befuddled when people lose theirs with me because, again, I don't have that in my toolkit.
Sure.
Um, and so maybe it's more effective than it ought to be because because it's just like, well, it does remind me, a dear friend, my best friend in college, went on to become a lawyer, now a judge in Minnesota. He said during a deposition once, the opposing counsel, simply went berserk and was screaming and
Oh,
throwing
geez.
papers around. And when it stopped, Ned turned to him and said, "Does this work for you in other contexts?" Comes to mind when I deal with someone who loses their stuff.
Thinking to young people becoming lawyers, the business of law has
Hmm.
changed tremendously over time.
Hmm. Yep.
I mean, the current crazy hot buzzword is all things AI and like how is this going to affect like all of
Right.
and everything. I in marketing I hear it every day. I hear lawyer friends talking about it like, oh gosh,
Hmm.
this is like really going to change the world. What does this mean for young people like starting law school? Like,
I'll tell you an anecdote. Yesterday, I'm no, 2 days ago, I met with the chair of two different law firms.
mhm,
One of them about 1,500 lawyers, one about 2,200 lawyers.
okay.
One of those chairs, CEO, said, um, we're really excited about licensing new AI products. We're trying out this one and that one. And we were, for Harvey, we were a pilot on the first contract. We do see an elimination of, some legal assistant positions
Okay.
over time. Um, and then later in the conversation, he said, and we asked, what's your outlook? I'm so bullish. Law school applications are up. It's a very good sign for the profession. We'll be able to have the best people out there
Mm,
working in our firm. The other law firm leader, he didn't say it about his, well, he said half the people who are going to law school should quit. There'll
wow.
be no jobs for them. The New York firms that are, he said 6-to-1 leverage. That's not really true in my experience. Anyway, um, this is not a big. This, by the way, this is a firm that's not. It doesn't have 500 lawyers in New York. Let's put it that way. They're going to be firing two thirds of those associates are going to be let go. That's why they're saying. That's why they're telling people to come back to the office 4 or 5 days a week, and so they quit, so they don't have to give them severance packages. AI is going to be eliminating a third of the work that lawyers do today,
Mm,
and um, so there are different views out there.
sure.
I tend to be more with the first fellow, um,
Okay.
or as one of my colleagues at Major Lindsey said, AI won't replace lawyers. AI will replace lawyers who can't use AI.
So well said.
Yeah,
And I think it's that you can take that and you can literally apply it, copy and paste it everywhere.
yeah,
Even in the marketing world, it can increase certain types of productivity.
right.
And if I'm being honest, it's the type of productivity you don't want to do to begin with, right?
Mhm.
Now, I will say there's work that I've done in the past that AI now does quite easily that I kind of had to cut my teeth on as a young person.
Hmm.
And I worry about young people coming up, how like their experience is just going to be different. They're going to now have a constant companion in AI to iterate with and work on things. But like true creativity, I think
I
that's a
I hope it helps people write better.
well, I think it does do that.
Yes,
If you use it well,
yes,
it left to its own devices is incredibly verbose and not.
hmm, right.
Yeah,
Yes, I do want, because if you can't write, you can't edit.
correct. Yeah, yeah, correct. That's right.
Um,
That's right.
you have to be a good writer to be a good editor, and so AI requires editing. So
Yeah.
it may not patch over that common weakness.
Right.
I certainly see, it was always stunning to me to see people who got great grades in law school. Well, if you know anything about law school exams, you know you don't have to write well on the exam. You have to issue spot,
Mm,
and it can be just this side of an outline. But worrying about you don't have time in a law school exam to think about the rhythm of a sentence.
mm,
Uh, but a good brief writer does. Notwithstanding the observations of the pessimistic uh, uh, law firm chair,
right.
um, in some ways it's a great time to come into the profession. The advice I always give people, frankly, is what when I talk to young people thinking about going to law school, the question is, why do you want to be a lawyer, and what law schools do you get? What law school are you getting into? Even midway through, how well are you doing? Because
Right.
if you want to go to law school because you grew up watching Perry Mason, whatever the equivalent is,
Right. Right. Right.
um, and you're happy to be in a courtroom anywhere, and you don't mind if it's Alameda juvenile court, or you know uh, if that's what that's what turns your crank, and you can
Right.
find a way to do it without bankrupting yourself.
Right.
Knock yourself out. Godspeed. Go to whatever law school you want.
Right.
Just get the job done as fast as you can.
Otherwise,
Yeah. But if you're going in for the $250,000 starting salary, and you're not at one of 25 law schools,
yep.
you're being sold a bill of goods. And it is the other. The other thing, of course, is I come back to my brother and the chairs for the Schwartz family.
Mm-hmm.
Are you inclined towards service? People who get being in a service business, I think, are less troubled by the hours
Mm,
and the commitment required,
right.
because you're doing it for a client. And if you're into the service business, you identify with that client. You care about outcomes for that client nearly as much as the client does. And if you can't generate that, you're going to hate being there at 4 a.m.
Have you ever had an experience where you love the client, or like it starts out and you love the client, things are going well, like and you're in it and you're like just like you described. You care as much about the outcomes as the client does. And you feel like you're partners in a problem or the engagement, whatever it is, right? Have you ever gotten to a point where some of that changes and you suddenly feel like, oh gosh, like I'm just somebody else that they're farming work out to, and then you've had to make a tough choice of saying like, you know what, I don't think the client's right for us anymore.
Well, you have ethical constraints.
Ah,
Uh,
this is true. This is true. Yeah.
you don't get to fire a client because you don't like them.
Right. Right.
That's the fun thing about what I'm doing now. As a recruiter, I don't have to work with anybody I don't like.
Well, right. So me running a marketing agency, I don't have to write. So
Right. But ethically, on the other hand, in the real world, it's not a conversation you have in the middle of an engagement unless they're asking you to do something inappropriate.
right,
But
right.
at the end of an engagement, I mean, I think sometimes the feeling's been mutual. I,
Sure.
there are clients who I didn't get another deal from, and I didn't mind that the phone didn't ring.
Right, right. Yep.
Yeah, and then there were ones where I was, you know, uh, heartbroken is a little strong, but I was profoundly disappointed, hurt maybe that I
Right.
didn't get the call
Mm.
because I did so connect with a client that it was like dating. I didn't like the idea of them. I just didn't like the idea of them getting to know another lawyer.
Right, totally, totally. Okay, last point, and I'm going to preface this by saying it's a legacy question. And there's a few ways to think about legacy. One, do you care? Right? There's like that component. And if you do, like, what do you think about your own legacy?
I had a great chat with the new COO at MoFo,
Mm-hmm.
who came from BCG. Very impressive guy, Brian Gross, who I don't think he would mind if I out him. He's also a gay man. And we were talking about, because I've kept very much my fingers out of the MoFo world. For me, obviously I bleed Morrison and Foerster, but I don't gossip. I don't.
Sure. Yeah,
I
that
don't
makes
check in. Just right. It's just too awkward.
Yep.
And there's no reason they should share anything with me. I mean, I'm in a business that's across the table from them, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I did observe that I've been disappointed in their economic performance in recent years. Some of the gains that I felt I made have been eroded to some extent. And, Brian and I were talking about, the dials that needed to be turned and this kind of thing. And he said, basically, you want to care about this because this is your legacy. And if you think of just the built to last principle, if what you achieved gets eroded, then maybe it wasn't such a great achievement. Maybe you didn't achieve everything you thought you did. So I am in some manners incredibly invested in the continued success of the firm that I spent 12 years. I spent 35 years there,
Right.
and 12 years running the place. So I care very much about its success. I think to the extent I helped open doors at a lot of firms for gay and lesbian lawyers, I'm very proud of that. But that was just me. That was just me being me.
Sure.
And I'm glad other people are being them.
Right.
And on the other hand, I think that work is so largely done that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it.
I think that's a wrap from me. Thank you very much, Keith.
Of course, David. It's been fun.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to Coded in Gold. If you liked this episode, please like, comment, or subscribe to help grow this community. You can find all the links to follow the podcast and our amazing guests in the show notes. Thank you, and take good care.